With an absolutely crazy Super Bowl behind us, shout out to the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, back to back, making history in their own rights. We have to shift our focus back to the NBA world, of course, like we do each and every Tuesday. But I'll make you a deal at home. If you clicked on this video, give me 5 minutes of your time. If you enjoy, of course, you found another podcast to help us on the road to the next big milestone. But if you didn't, well, hey, you tried another podcast. Today, we're going to be going through and ranking all 30 NBA teams on how likely I think they are to win the championship in 2024. But without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off here with the bottom six, and the first six ultimately have been the worst six in basketball all year. Whether if it's just due to, hey, it's a rebuilding year, whatever the case is, they've been the worst six teams in the year all season long, and most likely have their eyes on the number one pick. But starting here with Detroit, I mean, the worst team in the league all year. They were 8-44. They went on a historic losing streak, and they just traded two of their big rotational pieces, guys like Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic, and they didn't even get a first-round pick in return. Regardless, it's been a rough year. I just hope they get the number one pick, because if not, Cade might be out, sooner than we know it, right? For Charlotte, it's just another team that's made multiple trades at the deadline, moving some of their veterans on this team, most notably a guy like Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington. Of course, Gordon Hayward is now in OKC. PJ Washington, of course, is a member of the Dallas Mavericks. But that just opens the door for a lot of these younger guys, a lot of the younger talent to cement their place on next year's roster. Guys like Trey Mann, who they newly acquired. Guys like Leaky Black, of course, Amari Bailey. There's some other guys here on this roster. This team is extremely young. And, outside of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, who, shout out to him, he's been great with all the criticism he's gotten this year. There's not much else. So a lot of these young guys can really step up and make their name known. Of course, going into next season, where hopefully they can get at least a couple more wins. Moving over to the next two teams, we have the Washington Wizards, who, hey, look, they've lost 6 straight games. It's not been a pretty season, right? But they've lost overall 13 straight home games, which is one shy of what the Pistons lost at home, of course, when they went on their 20-plus game losing streak. This is a team in Washington that's bottom 5 in offense, defense, and net rating on the season. It just hasn't been a very successful year for them in the win column, but we have seen steps taken from guys like Denny, guys like Kyle Kuzma even, who is having a career year statistically wise, and even a guy like Bilal Coulibaly, who we all thought was a long-term project, and he still is, but he has shown definitely some signs of greatness this year, right? And he is farther along the process than we thought he would be in year number one. But I guess that's something. You've seen some development in some of your key guys that you want to keep going forward. For a team like Memphis, no team has dealt with more injuries this year than the Memphis Grizzlies, and that's really been the story of the year. I mean, they've lost 8 straight, and, at this point, they have no hope. Even if they went out to make a play-in push, they ultimately, this will ultimately be remembered as kind of just a reset year, especially with all that happened with, of course, Marcus Smart with his injuries, Steven Adams and his injuries, and, of course, John Morant, his suspension, then eventual injury. But, I mean, when John Morant came back, this team did look good. However, of course, we know he got hurt, unfortunately. But guys like Gigi Jackson have shown signs this year, and, of course, some other young pieces. It's going to be interesting to see who can really cement their place on next year's roster. But again, it's going to be a year, remember, just kind of a throwaway year in the history books of John Morant's career here in Memphis. But then we go over to the last two teams in this tier, the San Antonio Spurs, who, hey, you can argue they're very last in this power rankings, right? But let me preface at home. If they're in a tier, so all 6 of these teams, you can shuffle them around, and that's going to be the same way throughout the rest of the rankings, and you guys will see, of course, as we go on. But the San Antonio Spurs, it's kind of a shame that they're this low and they've had this, bad of a season team-wise, because Wemby is having such a great rookie year. I mean, he's having a generational prospect rookie year, right? He's averaging 20 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks, and hey, he just put up a triple-double with blocks in the game, putting up 27, I think 10-plus rebounds, and of course 10-plus blocks. Wemby's been sensational this year, but this team has lost 7 straight, and, they don't have much hope for the remainder of the year. But at least we get to see Victor Wembanyama, right, his development throughout the rest of the year. Interesting to see what will happen with a guy like Devin Vassell, as of course he wasn't really the biggest fan of Wemby when they got him. So it's going to be interesting to see if they hold on to him long term. Maybe he can generate some buzz around the league. For a team like Portland, they've just been banged up, as of late, and they've lost 4 straight games. But the last three losses they've had, including two of them to really good teams, they've been by single digits. So that's something. Regardless, this team is still top or bottom 10, excuse me, in offense, defense, and net rating and pace. So this team is just bottom of the league in all of the team statistics. And I just wouldn't be shocked if this team goes out there and tries to make a move this offseason. You signed Jeremy Grant with with the belief that Damian Lillard was going to return to the team. That didn't happen. So maybe you can move off that massive contract, especially with how in spurts Jeremy Grant has played this season. I mean, at the end of the day, we knew it was going to be a rough year without Damian Lillard, especially, a new chapter for the franchise. But I'm just, a side note here. I'm kind of surprised they didn't move a guy like Malcolm Brogdon at the deadline, but who knows what their asking price was. But for these bottom six teams, it's just been a rough year. Of course, better days are always ahead. The next six teams here are teams that are kind of just stuck in purgatory, excluding one of these teams, which I'll mention here. But all of these teams just kind of have a big range where they can finish. They're either going to be bottom five in the league, or they can either be a team that sneaks into a play-in tournament, or even win a play-in game, right? So big range for all six of these teams, of course, and all six of these teams are stuck in purgatory aside from one. For the Toronto Raptors, they're at number 24 for me, and after trading Pascal Siakam, one of the last main pieces of that championship team. And then they went out and they also traded OG Anunoby. We expected this team to finally reset and rebuild around Scotty Barnes. But for the second straight years, they were buyers at the deadline for whatever reason, as they sent a future first-round pick to Utah for, I believe, Ochai Agbaji and Kelly Olynyk. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but I believe that was the overall premise of the deal. But they're currently 5 or so games out of the play-in, so they have to pretty much be perfect from here on out. But the bare minimum, I guess, the front office can show Scotty, hey, I know the team doesn't look great this year, but we're at least willing to make moves and build around you going forward. Of course, that'll help his confidence going forward. For the Brooklyn Nets, they basically, built up some draft capital at the deadline. They lost a lot, acquiring Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and all the guys they wanted, of course, but they're trying to build that back up. And they moved off of some of those aging veterans at the deadline. And one of the guys that was, confusing, I guess is a good way to put it, they basically swapped Spencer Dinwiddie for Dennis Schroeder, who Dennis Schroeder is, yes, he might be a better player at the moment, but he also has another year at his contract. So that was confusing as far as Brooklyn is a big market. Hey, they have a solid team. They're kind of just missing that main guy. But hey, I mean, maybe they don't want to go, through that whole process again of just getting big stars and hoping it works. But they did get Dennis Schroeder at the deadline. Overall, it's just a very solid team. They just don't have that guy to take them over the top. McCall is still having a pretty good year statistically wise, and don't get it twisted, right? But then we talk about the Chicago Bulls, and since that terrible start, I believe they started like 3-14, something atrocious. They have quietly made their way all the way back up to the 9th spot in the Eastern Conference, and a large part of that turnaround has been Kobe White. Kobe White's having a career year. He's definitely in the most improved running category, and he would have been sixth man, of course, if Zach LaVine stayed healthy. But of course, DeMar and company, they've also played their part. Vucevic, DeMar DeRozan, not having the career years you would think if a team that has stormed back like this Bulls team has. But they're playing their part, and of course, this team is doing enough to win basketball games. That's the most important part. I will say, if the Zach LaVine drama didn't happen and he didn't want to be traded and now he's injured, right? I think this team could have been that much more dangerous, especially with the emergence of Kobe White. But this team can still sneak into the playoffs. And of course, they have DeMar, who in a one-game scenario can go off, right? So I think, it could be a dangerous situation if a team plays them in a play-in game, right? But then we talk about the Utah Jazz. This team has been confused since the departure of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, as it just feels like this team could be a contender one week, and then it feels like they could be a bottom feeder the next week, right? Because last year, we saw they started off the year hot. They were the number 1 seed for a period of time, if you believe me. And then they kind of fell off, came back to reality, and ended up missing the play-in. This year, they started off kind of mediocre, but as of late, the last couple weeks, they've been on fire, and they've been beating contender after contender. And we were like, hey, this kind of looks like this is who they are. But then the last couple weeks, they've kind of fell back down to reality. So this team has been kind of confused and just stuck in purgatory. But hey, they did pick up a future first at the deadline from Toronto. So that is something. And I will say, hey, they, going forward, even if they don't make the play in this year, they do still have a pretty solid core in Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, who's had a career year, Keontae George, who's been spectacular out of Baylor, and of course, Walker Kessler, who has all defensive potential in his future. And then to close off the list, the one team that is not stuck in purgatory is the Houston Rockets. And this team has just I think they just have so much potential. And I really think that they can be dangerous in the second half of the year. And let me explain, because especially if they make a play-in tournament, I don't think anybody's going to want to see them. They have lost 4 straight, and they have fallen 6 games under 500. And not to mention, teams like the Lakers and teams like the Golden State Warriors have shown improvement, and they've made the Rockets' life difficult as far as making the play-in. But I just hope that this Houston Rockets team, if they can get back to how they played early in the season, if they can get back to that way with Ime Udoka, this, don't get me wrong, they're still dominant defensively. But I just think if they can get back to winning games like they were early in the year, they can turn the switch. And let's say they even make the 10 seed. I don't know if in a one-game scenario with this top 5 level defense that Houston has, I don't know if anybody wants to see them, because it only takes one game for Sengun to go crazy offensively, or one game for Jalen Green to explode, and this team can make some noise and maybe make the playoffs like the Timberwolves did a couple years back. So Houston is not stuck in purgatory, to clarify. But I really don't, I think they have more potential than the other teams below them, and I really don't think anybody in the NBA wants to see Houston in a play-in tournament. For the Atlanta Falcons, right? My mind is still on football. For the Atlanta Hawks, excuse me, we all kind of expected DeJounte Murray to be traded at the trade deadline, but that just wasn't the case. In fact, there's now rumors, of course, you guys have seen, that Trae Young might be the guy on the way out the door, not DeJounte Murray. However, this team has still won 6 of their last 8 games. We know the potential they have, and we know they can be dangerous, especially with the emergence of Jalen Johnson, who's going to be the most improved player in 2024. I just think that this team needs to continue straining together quality wins, building confidence in each other. And of course, if Trae Young just doesn't shoot 40-plus foot three-pointers, for the majority of its attempts, I really think that this team can, build some confidence and build some continuity, and of course be dangerous in a playoff series. But of course, time will tell with the Atlanta Hawks, let me clarify. The next 6 teams here, of course, 18 through 13, they are all very dynamic in the fact that, whether due to injuries, poor play, or just the competitive conference that they're in, they're not where they want to be at the moment. But I can also say that these 6 have the ability to flip that switch in the second half of the season. And we'll talk about that with a lot of teams here. But we'll start here with the Philadelphia 76ers. And look, I'm a Cavs fan. Maybe I'm a little salty, and maybe I'm underrating this team a little bit, but let me know in the comments. But also let me explain before you run to the comments, right? They're at 18 because of one reason and one reason only. That is because Joel Embiid is hurt, of course. And we don't know when this guy is going to return. And even when he returns, is he going to be 100%? Is he going to be that back-to-back level MVP that we know Joel Embiid can be? I just don't know if that's a guarantee, right? Coming off the injury that Joel Embiid currently has. But ideally, this team, when they had Joel Embiid, they were a top 3 team in the conference. They had 2 all-NBA level players in Tyrese Maxey. Shout out to him, first-time All-Star. And Joel Embiid, of course. And of course, you have other guys like Tobias Harris playing really good ball this year. You just have a really good supporting cast around those 2 all-NBA level players. It's just the fact that Joel Embiid is hurt right now, and we don't know the ceiling of his team even when he does return, simply for the fact that, is he going to look like himself? Is he going to look like the guy that was leading the league in scoring and rebounding for the majority of the season? I just don't know if we're going to get that version coming off of this injury, diving straight into playoff action. It's not easy. But again, I think if Joel Embiid doesn't return this year, this is just going to be this year's, Brooklyn Nets, where they have a good young player, Mikal Bridges last year, Tyrese Maxey this year, but they might win a game or 2 in the postseason, but they're just ideally not good enough in a 7-game series without their star player to, win a series, right? And that's really what it comes down to. So Joel Embiid, if he's healthy and he's playing like he was a month ago, this team is higher in the rankings. Don't get me wrong, but as of right now, we don't know what the future of this team looks like because Joel Embiid is out. So that's why they're number 18. For Golden State, I know this might sound crazy, that they're above the 76ers, even with Joel Embiid out. But again, this is who I'm most confident in going forward the rest of the season. And the Warriors, well, they're still the Warriors, right? They've won 4 straight games, I think 5 straight after last night, to climb over 500 for the first time since about the midseason, since about 20 or 30 games in. Despite the terrible start to the season, this is a team that's just 3 losses away, or 3 losses behind the 4th seed Phoenix Suns, who they just beat this past Saturday. I know there's more questions than answers with this team, especially with how Klay Thompson and Draymond Green will play. But this team has been there, they've done that, and we know just like last year that they started off bad, but they flipped that switch. And not only did they flip that switch, they beat a really, really good Kings team in the first round and took the Lakers to 6 games. It could have been 5 games, excuse me. But you guys get the picture. This team has the ability to flip that switch. And again, they're number 17 because I think a lot more teams are better going forward, and I have a lot more confidence in other teams going forward. But I just think you have Stephen Curry, you have Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. That core has been there. They've done that. They can flip that switch. And if we just need some of these supporting cast members, like of course we know Brandon is going to show up, but guys like Wiggins, right, or Kuminga, we need some of these guys to consistently show up and just be that extra spark this team needs to take them over the top. Of course, Klay Thompson, be a little bit more consistent too. That would solve a lot of your team's problems. Then we have the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic. Excuse me. I'm not even going to cut that out the podcast, right? But of course, viral TikTok sound at the moment. And then we have the LA Lakers, and we'll start with the LA Lakers. But just like Golden State, this is the team that does have that same switch, hypothetically, where they can switch it just like last year. And hey, last year when they turned that switch, they went all the way to the Western Conference Finals. Of course, they didn't have much success there against the eventual champs, but they still made it, being the underdog series after series. This is a team that still has a loaded roster with the star power to top it off, but they're just not dominating the way they should be. Especially when you mention the fact that LeBron is almost about to cross 40,000 career points at the age of 39, and he's playing maybe the most efficient basketball of his career statistically. And then you have Anthony Davis, who's having his best year and healthiest year as a Laker, of course, in his tenure there. You have those 2 factors: efficient LeBron at 39, healthy AD. Why are we not at top of the conference? I don't know. To me, honestly, it all comes down and it points to one guy, and that is, of course, Darvin Ham, and of course, also the lack of effort on defense from some of your star players. To me personally, on the court, you need a guy to hold these guys accountable. I know it's not easy with LeBron James because he is the team, and he is the front office. He's everything but the ownership, right? I just don't know if Darvin Ham's the guy to lead this group into big time series and big time games. Again, that's also what we thought last year. And last year, Darvin Ham made some postseason adjustments. And last year, this team made it to the Western Conference Finals. So maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe Darvin Ham is the guy. We just need to give this team time, and maybe they will eventually just turn that switch. I don't know. The Lakers might ultimately have the biggest range as far as where they can go, ceiling to floor wise, because they can miss the play-in, or they can make it to maybe the NBA Finals, depending on who you ask. They definitely probably have the biggest range amongst all teams. But as a Cavs fan, if the Cavs don't get the finals, if they don't win it all, from a fan perspective, I'd like to see LeBron James take it home, of course. I skipped ahead there, but hey, let's get back to it with the Orlando Magic, a team that started off the year hot. They, were eventually, I think, a top 4 seed at the midseason mark, or around the new year, rather. And then they had a rough January, a really tough month there from this young Orlando Magic team. But this team has gotten back on track. They're 5-1 in their last 6. And though they're young, though they're one of the youngest teams in the league, this team has won as of late. And all season, this team has won primarily because of their top 5 rated defense in the NBA. We do worry about this team's youth when it comes to their youth from head coach down, really, because they have a young head coach, young star players, and of course, relatively young depth. So we do have to worry about that in a post-game or in a postseason 7-game series, but their defense is still good enough, at least, to keep them in these games. And, maybe guys like Franz Wagner or guys like, Paolo Banchero can do enough offensively to push them over the top. Of course, that's what gave them success early in the year. Ultimately, though, shout out to Franz Wagner, great year. Shout out to Jalen Suggs, kind of, changing the narrative around his name this year. And of course, also shout out to Palabanchero, a second year guy, but first time All Star. So shout out to him. Then we move over to the final two teams in this tier, and that is the Miami Heat and the New Orleans Pelicans. And when I talk about flipping that switch, you guys know that is the definition of the Miami Heat, as this is a team that last year, of course, we saw where they could go, all right, at their fullest potential. This is a team that's won 4 of their last 5 games since the Terry Rozier pickup. And of course, shout out to the rookie, Jaime Jaquez Jr., as he's going to finish as a top 3 in Rookie of the Year voting this year. And the Heat ultimately have done it again, where they kind of find a player out of nowhere and he becomes relevant. So shout out to Eric Spoelstra and that developmental crew, but also to Jaime Jaquez, right? But for Jimmy and Bam, they've both missed some time this year collectively, and this is a team that is the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference because of it. Now they have a comfortable lead at the moment over the Atlanta Hawks, or the Chicago Bulls rather. That's a big reason why this team is the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. But as we've seen over the last couple of years, and it really seems like every year, it doesn't matter where you put this team in the postseason, as long as as long as their star players are healthy, you don't know this team can go, to the finals. And hey, if we want to talk about scripts, if we want to talk about potentials and just kind of coincidences in 2020, whatever the bubble year was, the Chiefs went to the Super Bowl and they won the Super Bowl. The Miami Heat, they made the finals in 2020. So Chiefs won the Super Bowl, Heat won the Heat made the finals, excuse me. In 2023, last year, the Chiefs went and they won the Super Bowl. The Heat made the NBA Finals. This year, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and the Heat now have a chance to continue this theory, of course, Coast Sports, and to at least make the NBA Finals. So, hey, at least there's a little bit of a script behind the Miami Heat going forward. But then we talk about the New Orleans Pelicans, and it might be a hot take why they're so low. Again, they're so low because, again, this is my confidence in them, include for the rest of the season, from now until the last second of the NBA season, and that includes the postseason, which I'm expecting the New Orleans Pelicans to make. I just haven't seen this team at full health in a 7-game series, but I will say they do have the talent. I'm just worried. I don't know how this team is going to play in a 7-game series, right? They have won 5 of their last 6, and a large part of that is because they basically have a top 10 offense and defense in that stretch. I really like the job Willie Green has done so far with this unit, and if healthy, I wouldn't be shocked if this team finds a way to not only make the playoffs, but make it to the second round, of course, behind Brandon Ingram, Zion, Trey Murphy, CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas, and of course, all the other talented players I'm missing at the moment. Jose Alvarado, of course, he's going to get his steals every single game. You're just a very talented team top to bottom, and I think Trey Murphy coming back from injury is going to be huge for them, as it already has been, right? Ever since he's come back. I can't talk there, but stick with me. These next 6 teams will all be playoff teams. I'm expecting, and they can all make deep playoff runs this year. Of course, given to their scheme or whatever the case may be. I believe all 6 of these teams can make it to at least the conference finals in their respective conference. But as of right now, for the Indiana Pacers, this is the greatest offense of all time, even though that is a watered down stat, because every single year we have the greatest offense of all time with how offenses are, revolutionizing every single year. This is a team that did trade for Pascal Siakam, which was an amazing trade, by the way. And, this is a team that looked like they were going to go all in. But then they just traded Buddy Hield, a guy that's been on the trade block for years, granted. But I think it was just a very confusing time to trade him, especially because they need the spacing around guys like Tyrese. You need the spacing around guys like Pascal Siakam, which those guys can shoot the 3, but they're not knockdown shooters. I think, at least Tyrese, I guess he could be, right? Regardless, you guys get the picture. For being such an elite playmaker, you need shooters around you. And Buddy Hield was exactly that. I just think he fit this running gun scheme to a T. Very confusing on why they would trade him. Regardless, this team has the potential to make it really far with this running gun, up and down, shoot a ton of 3s scheme, but they also have the potential to go out there and, if they're cold, get swept in the first round. So the Pacers have a lot of range when it comes to the playoff picture. I don't see them making it to the NBA Finals, right? I think they're capped at the Eastern Conference Finals, but of course, that is also if they're hot for the entirety of the playoffs. of course, making a ton of threes. But then we talk about the Sacramento Kings, and it might be another hot take. I think I'm higher on them than general media. Regardless, I know this team blows second half leads, kind of like it's in their contract. But I do believe in this Kings team more this year than last. And again, that might be a hot take. But this team has two guys that are playing their best career ball in De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. They're both pissed off. They're both trying to prove a point, and they're both trying to avenge their early exit from the playoffs last season. This team has a supporting cast around them. Well, I guess, on some nights they do. I'll say that some nights they do, some nights they don't. But I do believe if Mike Brown can clean up these second halves, close out these games, and maybe get a spark or two from this bench on a consistent basis, I think this team can make the second round of the playoffs this year, with the potential, of course, to make it farther. But two very underrated stars in Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. And of course, they both should have made the original All-Star ballot, in my opinion. But then we talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. Of course, the team I've been really high on the last couple of years, just like the majority of fans, right? But last year I had them as my title favorites. I was calling it the best Bucks team of all time last year. And it just, last year didn't pan out the way I thought. Of course, losing that first round series to the Miami Heat. And then we have the Phoenix Suns. Let's start here with the Milwaukee Bucks, as it's just not often you see a coach go 30-13 with a group, then get fired, and then Doc Rivers takes over. Of course, a champion head coach, but even he goes 2-6 after a head coach was 30-13 with the same exact group. Regardless, there's no denying the star talent on this team, but ultimately, I just think their playoff lives, come down to how bought in and how good is this defense going to be in a 7-game series. As for all those years that Coach Bud was here, right, never made adjustments. But one thing he did do, right, was have a good defense, and this team hung their hats on that side of the ball for years in the Giannis era. And I just think that is huge in the postseason. And ultimately, to be honest, if Bud would just have adjusted, offensively once or twice more throughout the years, maybe this team would have made it to and maybe won another NBA Finals. But regardless, this is the worst defensive group in the Giannis era. And if they can't fix it, I just don't like their chances in a 7-game series against these high-powered offenses to, of course, win it all. But again, if they can fix this defense, Giannis and Dame alone, what do they call it? The freak time duo? I think that duo is enough alone to carry you throughout the postseason. And of course, it would always be great to see Dame get his first ring. I just don't know about Doc Rivers. I don't know about this defense. I don't know what kind of consistency we're going to get on that side of the ball. We know the offense is there, but what is that defense going to look like in a slowed down 7-game series? If they can't fix it, I don't like their chances. For the Phoenix Suns, they have Kevin Durant, they have Devin Booker, and they have Bradley Beal. That could be my only argument, but I'll put some numbers behind it. They are 12-6 in their 18 games together, and they've been dominant in those 12 wins, I might add. But on the year, this is a team that has a top 10 offense and net rating. They're also top 15 in defense. So they're checking a lot of boxes here as far as championship level team. They have the talent. They just need to play enough defense along the way to keep them in the running and have this offense take over. But again, they have Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, arguably two top 10 players in the league, and Bradley Beal, who's a top 50 player as well. 3 elite offensive scorers. Yusuf Nurkic has been good. Bol showing some flashes. I'm just really excited to see what they can do in a 7-game series. Hopefully this time fully healthy. But then we close off this tier of teams that, again, I can see being dark horse teams or teams that can make it to the Eastern or Western Conference Finals. Maybe not title contenders yet, but of course these teams have the potential. And out of all these teams, 7 and 8, I think, could be dark horse championship teams. For the New York Knicks, seemingly, they were the biggest winners at the NBA trade deadline. They got 2 very valuable rotational pieces in Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks for very little. They didn't even give up a first-round pick, especially for a team like the Knicks. Surprising they didn't have to give up a first-round pick. But they do have some big injuries as of right now. Guys like OG Anunoby, who they traded for early in the year. Guys like Julius Randle, who had a separated shoulder. Hopefully they can return relatively soon. But also a guy like Jalen Brunson, who's been battling a lot of knick-knack injuries for the entire year. Hopefully this All-Star break he can reset and get back to full 100% health. but I just don't know if there's a lot of teams that are deeper from 1 through 10 than the New York Knicks. Maybe you can argue just with the star power of the Boston Celtics, maybe they're deeper. Maybe you can argue the depth of the LA Clippers, maybe they're deeper. I just don't know 1 through 10 if there's a team that's deeper than the New York Knicks, and especially in a defensive aggression, in a Tom Thibodeau scheme is what I'm trying to say. I just think that could be huge in a 7-game series because at full health, I can guarantee you nobody wants to see this team in the first round of the playoffs, especially as a Cavs fan. I can tell you, you don't want to see this team in the first round of the playoffs, right? Especially if you have Jared Allen on your team and the lights are too bright. But then at number 7, I might catch some flack for this, but if you followed the channel at all, you know I've been high on this team for the entire season, and they only have gotten better at the NBA trade deadline. As this team I've been saying all year, of course, of course, the writing was on the wall. They needed size and they needed some spacing, and they got that in Daniel Gafford, who, of course, in his first couple games with the Mavericks has looked amazing, but also PJ Washington, who I think was kind of more so known for what happened to him off the court than on the court. Of course, with his allegations, right? But I just think a change of scenery could be huge for the development of him going forward. And I just think going to a team like Dallas could be huge for him going in the second half of the season. I just think that, having the size is what's been missing on this team really for the entire Luka era, as they didn't really have a dominant big in the Dirk and Luka era. Then they didn't really have a dominant center when Kristaps and Luka were there. So this is kind of where they don't. Again, it's not Shaq, right? They don't have a Shaq level center, but I think they do have two quality big men now. Of course, next to Derek Lively, who's had an amazing season. I just think that this team, they now have the size, spacing, and the star power. Of course, led by Luka and Kyrie Irving. They've been my dark horses all year. And I think that horse just might be, getting ready for a little bit of a long ride. I think they can make it as far as the NBA Finals, if you want my crazy hot take of 2024. But then we close off with the final 6. And as of right now, I believe these 6 teams are title contenders. And I think that is a foregone conclusion heading into the second half of the season. Starting here with, look, I might be biased. Let me know in the comments. But this is a team that has won 17 of their last 19 games before last night's loss, which was surprising to the Sixers. They won 17 of their last 18. The Cleveland Cavaliers, to me, I think have been amazing. Granted, that has been an easier schedule throughout these last 19 games, but I think what we're doing, winning these teams against these lower teams, I think it's better than the contrary, right? If this team was splitting in this 20-game stretch, or if they were just kind of mediocre in that stretch. This is a team that is taking advantage of their schedule. They're winning the games they need to win, and that is a sign of a really, really good team. This is a team that is finally healthy again, and we should only get stronger throughout the second half of the season as Darius Garland and Evan Mobley fully get their feet back under them, playing, of course, full-time yet again. I will say JB has been a lot better this year when it comes to adjusting and of course, the rotations. But I'm still worried about this guy that that we saw the last 2 or 3 years, especially when it comes to playoff time. I'm worried that this guy is just going to get lackadaisical, and I hate to say that about a coach, but last year he just didn't adjust in the playoffs, and we ultimately lost because of it. I really want to see this team adjust, and I really want to see the JB that we're seeing right now in this 20-game stretch. I want to see him continue into the postseason, continue making adjustments throughout the game, and continue having these great rotations. Of course, if we can do that, we can make some noise. And I think if there was a dark, I guess, I don't want to say a dark horse because the Cavs are pretty good, but I guess throughout the entire league, you could say the Cavs are a dark horse title contender. For the Oklahoma City Thunder, they picked up Gordon Hayward at the deadline, and the reason this team is not higher is because they still don't have a big man. And, in the games that Gordon Hayward has played already, they've been clobbered on the glass. They've been losing the rebound battle for all season. And I said, hey, you have 28 first-round picks. Call up the Brooklyn Nets and see what they want for a guy like Nick Claxton. Look, even if they had a crazy asking price, let's say the Brooklyn Nets were like, hey, we want 3 first-round picks for Nick Claxton. I get it. That might be scary, but you have 26 first-round picks or something like that. There are 26 overall picks. And trade 3 of them. Go get Nick Claxton, a guy that can protect the rim, rebound, and you don't need to play him as your primary big. Of course, ideally you trade for a guy with that draft cap or that trade capital to start him, right? but you can also run lineups where, he doesn't have to be on the court at the end of the games, if you really want that extra spacing. But a guy like Nick Claxton, I think, could have been huge for this team going forward. And I just don't think they have that dominant big to take them over the top, because even Nick Claxton and I think Chet could have played together, in postseason stretches. But regardless, I guess that's why I'm sitting at home, right? This is a team in the Thunder that arguably have the MVP of the league right now, aside from the rebounding, in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and they have a really, really good supporting cast around them. I'm just worried about the rebounding in a slowed down 7 game series with other teams that just have ultimately much more size. I could see this team being this year's Sacramento Kings, where they had an amazing year, but they were relatively young, and they get to the playoffs in a situation that they haven't really been before, and they kind of just shrink under the lights and they kind of fall short to their potential. So I think the Thunder are title contenders this year with how they've played, but I think there's 4 other teams that I would bet more money on than the Oklahoma City Thunder. Moving into the top 4 with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and yes, they've been a little bit shaky in the year 2024, but all year, what has stayed the same has been that they've had the #1 defense in the entire NBA, and of course also the #2 overall net rating. It is kind of spelled, this lackluster, bottom 10 offense that they've had. But to me, what separates them is the fact that they have that rising superstar in Anthony Edwards, who has been elite, especially as a playoff performer. But then they also have Cat, who's had a resurgent year. And of course, he's been more aggressive than ever. But I didn't even mention, so far that they have two all NBA level defenders in guys like Jaden McDaniels and, of course, Rudy Gobert. I just think that this team has enough to lock up in the playoffs, but they also have the talent offensively that they can kind of spell this lackluster offense in a 7 game series and take them over the top. So with the Timberwolves, I believe in just a little bit more than the Oklahoma City Thunder. For the Boston Celtics at #3, this might be a hot take, but again, this is a team that has done everything that you would have wanted out of a title contender so far this season. They have the #2 defense, number 2 offense, #3 defense, and the #1 net rating all this year. They're 25-3 at home. They were at a point where they were 19-0 at home. Regardless, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They have arguably 4 top 50 NBA players on the roster with Jrue Holiday, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Kristaps Porzingis. But they also have 2 of the best glue guys in the league, guys like Al Horford and Derek White. These are guys that can start on any given night. No pun intended, right? Or no rhyme intended. But this is a team that was my preseason title favorites for a reason, and they still probably should be my title favorites. But again, I just think that, when you look at #1 and #2, whether if it's the fact that those teams have been there before, or for the fact that, hey, one of those teams just has that much potential, it was just hard that at full health, I'm assuming that that those teams would lose to the Celtics in a 7 game series. And let's just get into it to kind of, to show you guys what I'm talking about. At #2, I have the Denver Nuggets. And again, it's just hard to put this team. I will say it is hard to put this team at #2 because they have maybe a top 5 worst bench in the entire NBA. But they just, they are the reigning champs for a reason. And they aren't the reigning champs because of Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, who they lost this offseason. But I will say they are they were the reigning champs because they have the best player in the world in Nikola Jokic, paired with maybe the best duo partner in the NBA in Jamal Murray. They also have a career year happening this year from a guy like Michael Porter Jr. And of course, Aaron Gordon is still Aaron Gordon, being the menace that he is. This team has the 5 and the coaching to compete with anybody, but they also have that home court advantage to take them over the top in 7 game series. Maybe the best home court advantage in the entire NBA. Regardless, I think they're led by the best player in the world. They're still contenders. They just need one of these guys off the bench, like Christian Braun, or one of these guys just to step up and be that Bruce Brown of this year to take this team over the top. And I think that's the only reason they're missing, or that's the only thing they're missing. Because of course we don't want to see Jokic or Jamal Murray. These guys get burned out in the postseason. But again, in the postseason, you're only running 7 or 8 deep. But that's also why you need a guy like Christian Braun to step up, or Reggie Jackson to step up and be that guy. Weirdly enough, if salaries matched up, I would have loved to see like a Zach LaVine trade, especially if the trade market was as obsolete as it was, or at least as they were reporting for a guy like Zach LaVine. But of course, he's now hurt. of course, in the mind of the Chicago Bulls. But then at number one, this might be a hot take, but look, on paper, there's no way that James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard should work on a basketball court, at least as far as the win column. As four guys that are primarily ball dominant ball handlers that have been known as Hall of Fame players because they've been the guy on their teams, but it has. And I think a lot of that is due to the credit of Tyronn Lue. And of course, I think he is the best head coach in the NBA. He's balanced these four first ballot Hall of Famers perfectly. He's found the perfect recipe to play them all. And shout out to Tyronn Lue because he's positioned these guys on the court in such great ways, and he's had such great rotations this year that 6 players on this team are shooting 40% or more on catch and shoot threes, and that just opens the floor for guys like James Harden to ISO, or Paul George or Kawhi to ISO. More so not Russell Westbrook, but you guys get the picture. This team has the Hall of Fame player level talent, right? But they also have, those role players that are stepping up shooting great percentages from the outside. It's just absolutely insane that you have all of this on the same team. I just think that outside shooting opens up the door, like I mentioned, for all these star players. I will say I'm worried about this team when it comes to postseason time because of guys like Harden and Westbrook are not primarily known as playoff performers, but I think when you have guys like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard that have shown time and time and again when they're healthy, they can be dominant, elite playoff performers, especially a guy like Kawhi, who is out this year, for blood. He's ultimately trying to prove that he is still a top 5, top 10 level player. And of course, I think they kind of created these rules to play a minimum of games because of a guy like Kawhi Leonard, or at least he was maybe the focal point of the argument. Regardless, I think this team has it all. They have the head coaching, star talent, depth, everything. Clippers, if they're healthy, would be my title favorite since 2024. And of course, I'm changing it from the Boston Celtics. But that is ultimately going to do it here for today's video. Of course, if you made it to this point, thank you for your time, your patience, and of course, hopefully you just enjoyed talking some ball here for 20 or so minutes. But if you enjoyed, of course, drop a comment. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? But until next time, until Thursday when we go through some playoff awards, I'm out of here.